probably all know that Josh was one of the co-founders of Capital Factory, which is an early stage accelerator, and he's going to talk more about that later. I've got some questions for him about that. He brought together 20 other people to form it, but we're going to start back a little bit, like a way bit, and we're going to talk about his childhood. And the first thing is, I got some inside information from a reliable source, and it turns out that from a very young age, Josh was a creator of things. In fact, he won a state award in piano composition at 10. And I want to know, how did that feel when you won? Do you remember this at all?
I do. It's too bad that you didn't get the picture of me holding the award.
There were no pictures.
But yeah, no, I do remember that. Piano lessons were somewhat of a torture that I was kind of forced to go through for, I think, maybe 7 years. In hindsight, it was a good thing, but it was I was kind of fought it a bit at the time, and I think when I look back at it and I talk to my mom, who's here in the audience, about piano lessons, I always say things. I was always like, if they were just teaching me songs that I wanted to play instead of classical music, I would have been way more into it, and I think I would have engaged a lot more. And in some way, I feel like the composition part was the answer for that for me, where it was like it was really interesting because I was creating something. I was trying to make something, and so in a couple ways, that was certainly one of the first things I think I created or made. Not that it was that big of a thing or anything, but it was something that I had made and was was proud of, and it was really interesting to get recognized for it. I remember I was kind of thinking well, that wasn't it wasn't that good. I'm just a kid, so I think that was in that way it was really encouraging, and I think it just certainly was one of the first steps for me of a trend of there's a book called Discover Your Strengths, which is a strengths finder test, which is pretty popular in a lot of businesses, and it kind of like a Myers-Briggs kind of looks at what you're into and tries to figure out what you're best at and where you should really focus. And I'm an activator, which means I need to do things. And if I get to the end of the day and I feel like I didn't do something today, I didn't make something, then I kind of feel like I failed. And to me, that was kind of the start of that.
So where did you move from composition after, because I understand that was the end of the piano composition career. So where did you go from there before, as your next step? You didn't just stop creating things and start it again later, right?
That's a good question. I think, in a lot of ways, computers were that kind of the next bridge there. That was, it was a great time for me. I was kind of getting into computers in the 80s when things like AOL was a big deal, and really was like the internet. And what really attracted me to computers was also this kind of activation thing. It was the ability to create something out of nothing, and to be able to just using your mind to go make something that actually did something and add value and was interesting. And that was always fascinating me about computers. And really, things have come so far since then that now you can so inexpensively start a business and create something out of nothing like you couldn't before. That's only become more and more so. But I think computers was definitely the next bridge.
Excellent. And is that part of what attracted you to Carnegie Mellon? And they're famous for their computer program.
Yeah, that was it. I was in my sophomore year of high school, the summer after, I did a summer program at CMU, and so it was like a pre-college thing, they called it, but it was basically just get away from your parents for the summer and live like a college kid when you're in high school, which was pretty awesome. And so we were living in dorm rooms at a thing, and there were kind of technically counselors or something, but they were college kids, so they were probably more of a bad influence than a good influence. And that was really fun. And so that got me exposed to CMU, and so I was comfortable with it. And partly because of that, I applied early decision, also because I was lazy and I didn't want to fill out a lot of college applications. And so when I got in early decision to CMU, it was kind of a no-brainer. They were the #1 computer science school in the world, and I knew about it, and I knew it was like a place I was comfortable, and I got in, so then I wasn't gonna have to make any more college applications, so I was done.
Yeah, that makes good sense. So while you're there, you start your first company from your dorm room in 1996. How did you get that start? Did you set out to start a company, or did it more fall in your lap?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I went into college, and I remember we had fraternities at my school, and I went through Rush, and Rush was like a dating game of going to all the different fraternities and seeing who has the best free food, and so at those you'd meet different people, and I remember like the first week of school sitting on the wall, some wall, talking to some guy who ended up actually becoming a really close friend of mine, and I remember saying right then, I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, I don't know what business I'm gonna start, but I think I want to run my own business. Like I look back at my family, and my father's an entrepreneur, and his father was an entrepreneur, and all through my family I see all these entrepreneurs, and I think I want to work for myself. And so I definitely was explicitly saying it going into there without really knowing what it was. The thing I ended up doing was a total accident. That's just, I think I'm a big fan of like activity causes opportunity, and I was doing lots of things which didn't necessarily have a clear purpose or direction, but that led me to starting that company.
So tell us a little bit about that company and what it did, and how did you manage? I had a hard enough time in college, frankly, going to college and full time. How did you manage working and
Right.
creating a company and doing your coursework and being in college?
It started. So my first company was called Skylist, and it was what's now called an email service provider, of which there are a lot of them. Two have recently gone public. One's called Exact Target, and another one's called Responsys. Not too long before that was another one called Constant Contact. So those are all really big players in the space. Skylist was one of the first ones, and it was all focused on email, which generally is not really a sexy, fun, or interesting topic. People don't really usually get excited about email, or nobody seems to get as excited about it as I do. And that was totally an accident. I didn't really know much about email, but I was a poor college kid, and I was studying computer science, and I wanted, at the time, there was no such thing, this is 1994, there was no such thing as an open beta program. Now it's like every beta program is an open beta program, so open almost doesn't even mean anything. You just assume if it's a beta program, like anybody can go download it. That was actually like a new thing in 1994, and the first open beta program, I'm pretty sure, was Netscape. And it was when the first web browser was becoming commercial, and they had an open beta, and that was like such a big deal that it was an open beta, because all betas before that were closed. And closed betas meant that you probably didn't even know they existed unless you were already a customer, and you had to apply and sign an NDA, and they didn't accept everybody, and then you would get a copy of the software. And as a college kid not having any money, I couldn't buy any software, so the only way to get access to software was to go become a beta tester and then get a free copy of it to play with. And at the time, there was a web server that was really popular on the Mac called WebStar, and that was like the top web server. And I went to but it would cost a couple $100, and I couldn't afford to buy it, so I went to the website to apply for the beta program, thinking I'll get a beta program and hopefully get to use it for free. And so I filled out the form for WebStar, and right next to it was another form for another product they had called ListStar, which was an email server, an email program they were building. And apparently everybody was applying for the WebStar beta program, because I did not get accepted into that, because I had absolutely nothing to offer these people and was never going to pay full price for the software. But probably not that many people were applying for the email one, because email wasn't as sexy. And so I got into that one. And so they sent me the software, and I'm on the beta program, and I'm a college kid. I have absolutely no idea what I'm supposed to do with the software. Like, I just have it, and I know it costs a couple $100, so I'm thinking it's cool, like I should figure it out. So I read the manual, because I'm a college kid, and I have time to read the manual. Nobody else probably reads the manual. And there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, but there was, I do feel like there was social media, and it was news groups, and it was email lists. And the same things happened. It wasn't as efficient as it is now, but it was the same kind of things. And so what happened was, it was like what happens on Twitter and Facebook now, but I just started there was a community, there was a list, and I started answering people's questions on the list because I had read the manual. And so people would post these questions all the time, and a lot of them were simple questions. And I would I was a college kid. I had a lot of time on my hands. I would answer their questions. And then first the CEO was somewhat of a small company, noticed that I was answering all these questions, and he said, "Hey, why don't we make you an intern? And we'll pay you to answer the questions, and you can maybe write some software for us on the side when you have extra time." And so I started doing that. And then also really quickly, people started asking me to do consulting around it. So they would say, so I would answer people's questions, and at some point somebody would ask a question that was like, this is a good way to start a small business. It's like you start answering everybody's questions for free on Twitter or other places, and then at some point someone is going to ask you a question that's like not a really quick answer. And it's like, okay, this is going to take me like an hour or two to fix this problem for this person or to figure it out. At which point you write back to me, it's like, hey, I'm really sorry, like I'd love to help you with that, but that's actually going to take a while, and so I can't just do that for you. But I do some consulting work, and maybe for $20 an hour or whatever, like I could fix that for you. And at the time it was mostly like buy me a pizza or something, and I'll fix that for you. And so that grew into consulting, and so then I just started doing consulting work. And I would just put my bottom of my signature, like need help with your thing, and then I would just answer everyone's questions for free. And eventually people started doing consulting. And then one day, one of my consulting customers called me up, and he said, every time my server breaks, I have to call you, and then you go and you seem to wave your arms around and you fix it pretty quick, but I just don't want it to break. And you run a server, and your server probably breaks, but I don't ever see it break. So it seems like it just works all the time. So what if instead of me paying you every time my server breaks, I just pay you like $50 a month, and you just run my thing on your server? And that doesn't sound like that revolutionary of an idea right now, but there really wasn't any hosting back then, or software as a service, or any of these. Actually the first name for it we called it back then was application service provider. It was before there was ASP for Windows. And so I was like, oh wow, you're gonna pay me $50 a month even if I don't do anything, just for like hosting your thing on the school, and I'm like on the school network, like not even like paying for my bandwidth. And so of course naively I'm thinking, well, nothing's ever going to go wrong, and I'm just going to get paid $50 for doing nothing, so this is the greatest thing in the world. And so that was the beginning of my hosting business. And so one person offered to pay me, and I started hosting. And because I was a college kid and I had my rent paid for and my food paid for, I could let the business just grow organically. And so basically over the next 2 to 3 years, I kept doing that, and I kept just organically picking up consulting customers and hosting customers. And and I was able to get first it was running on my personal computer that my parents had bought me for schoolwork, and then I could afford to buy I bought a used computer, like another computer, and that was the server. And then there was another server. Then there was like a wall.
All in your dorm room?
This was in my fraternity house. Then there was a wall of shelves of servers, and then my fraternity room was overheating.
I was just about to ask how you kept that all cool.
Yeah.
Even in Pittsburgh, which is not overly warm.
Yeah, in the summer it's hot. But so that wasn't really working, and I was getting kind of nervous, like, wow, I'm using the school's bandwidth for all this. Like, it's probably isn't gonna work forever. And so bandwidth was like expensive back then. And so then I moved off campus with a couple friends of mine, and we got a house, and it was like a 4 or 5 bedroom house, and I took the basement, and half the basement was racks of servers and a fractional T1 line, so it was a quarter of a T1 line, which is like 256K, which sounds not very fast right now, but that was like wicked fast. That was like it was like $2,500 a month for 1/4 of a T1 line, which you probably get a T1 line for, I don't know, $500 a month, $200 a month, something like that now.
Wow.
And a T1 line is 1.5 megabits, and so I think right here in this office we have 50 megabits up and down now. So it's like things change a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we had a T1 line going in there, which was like a big deal, and a bunch of racks of servers, and then the other side was like my bed and my TV and like the rest of where I lived, and I would just basically walk between the two of them. And then we kind of grew organically from there while I was still in school.
And so then occasionally you go to class.
Oh yeah, and then you asked how did I balance it with school. So another interesting thing back just dating myself is I was there it was like the first year I got there, it was a big deal that every dorm had a wired Ethernet. There was Ethernet in the dorms. That was like a big deal, and most schools didn't have that. And probably like 2 or 3 years after I graduated, there was wireless everywhere. But so what's fascinating to me is that there was not wireless in the classes, and so I didn't go to many classes. But like really went to the ones that I thought I got a lot of value out of, and I definitely was focused on the business pretty quickly, more than school. I look back, and if this was happening today, I think I actually would have done a lot more school, because I would have been able to work in class,
yeah.
and I would actually probably been going to a lot more classes and trying to absorb more.
I don't think it's that unusual for college students not to go to class, even if they don't have a business.
Yeah, and now they can do Facebook in class too.
Exactly. It's like being anywhere. So you graduated, you have this company, you moved to Austin?
Yeah.
Is it that simple?
No. I came here for Trilogy software, like a lot of other people I knew at the time that were pulled in for Trilogy, and I had my company, and it was, compared to like what I think about a company today, it wasn't much of a company. It was doing probably a couple $100,000 a year in revenue, but I was like the only employee, and I had like 1 or 2 people working part time, so I was like the richest college kid around. It was like, it felt cool. I could buy beer every weekend, like it felt great. And I totally thought I was like the king of the world. I was living off campus. I partied at my fraternity house all the time, and I was a senior. It's like the feeling when you're a senior, whether it's high school or college, like you're at the top of the world. And I really was thinking, this is it. I've got the life. Like, I'm never gonna go take a job. I'm never gonna leave my fraternity house. I'm just gonna like stay here and work and just live like a college kid the rest of my life. And now I go back to my fraternity house every once in a while. It's really, really dirty. I don't think I would really want to live there right now. But I think it was not any dirtier than it was. But I thought that was it. And another friend of mine had graduated a semester before me, and named Jonathan Berkowitz, and he came down here to work at Trilogy Software. And he came down in '98, and I was graduating in '99, which was when you hear about the dot-com boom. That was the peak of the dot-com boom. And things were pretty crazy. Everyone talks about bubbles. That was the bubble. And Trilogy was here in Austin. And Trilogy, I believe, now has 4 employees. Trilogy is still going. It's still actually
it's changed a bit.
It's changed a lot. It's still a very big company, revenue-wise. But at the time, it was I think about 1,500 people, and competing with Oracle and Siebel and SAP and companies like that. And they were trying to recruit from the top schools in the country, and they're recruiting from Carnegie Mellon and MIT and Stanford, and just bringing tons of smart people to Austin. And they also at the time just announced they were putting $100 million into an incubator to go create new internet businesses. And so they specifically were looking for entrepreneurs to bring to Austin to be part of that. And they also had this really interesting program over the summer they called Trilogy University, which really to me it's like what Capital Factory is or Y Combinator is during the summer. I mean, it was very, very similar. It was before those things existed, but it was take a whole bunch of people right out of school, throw them in a big room together, and then have almost like a Survivor-style bake-off over the course of the summer for creating companies and having them kind of compete against each other to see which ones get resources and survive. And you started off at the beginning, and there were 25 companies. By the end, there were probably about 5, and those 5 got funded and got resources and grew. That was a really great experience and filled with tons of other really, really other smart people. And so Jonathan sold me on that he was like, hey, you got to come down to Austin. Like, one, Austin's a great city. There's so much going on here. Like, I know you think you got it in Pittsburgh. Trust me, this is better than Pittsburgh. And you got to check out Trilogy. You want to be around all these smart people. They're looking for entrepreneurs. There's such a big opportunity here. And I really was thinking, wow, I never planned on even ever interviewing for a job or ever taking a job. And but he convinced me to. And they were good at selling it too. It was like really fun, and they were having these big events and stuff. So like, let's fly you down to Austin, blah, blah. So I came down, and over the course of time, they convinced me to come down. And in the end, the CEO, Joe Lemont, he was like, look, learn on my dime. He's like, you have your company, keep your company. You've been running that on the side in school, keep running that on the side. Come to Austin, you're going to be around a bunch of other smart people. You're going to spend my money while you make a bunch of mistakes. And at the end of it all, you can go back to your company. You can keep doing that, and I don't know if he really meant that literally, but that's exactly what I did. And so I came down to Austin.
Moved
and
your racks of servers.
Trilogy paid to move my racks of servers. That was part of my like moving expenses. And we came down to Austin. We bought a house up north in like on like Anderson Mill, kind of just north of there, like it's pretty far up north. I didn't really come down to downtown for like the first like 6 or 7 years I was here. At first I bought a house and I took one room and we put all the servers in that. And when you do that, you have to like get the amps upgraded into the house and like put extra outlets in through the room and things like that. So we did that, and I would go to work during the day, and then everyone would work at my house during the day. I would come back home, and then I'd work at night with them, and then and that got old really fast, having everybody in your house. Like you get back home at the end of the day, and you're like tired, and like there's 5 people there, like they've been partying all day or working all day. Sorry, not partying. And it was kind of a little both at the time. Basically, yeah, the way we worked at the time was there was like a really big TV, and like I think it was a Dreamcast was the gaming thing at the time, and there were like 5 of us, and so it was like if it wasn't your turn to play, then you worked, and like. And then,
so it was exactly like the Social Network.
I don't know exactly, but it got crazy. So we had one house, so that got really old. So then and then one of my friends had moved down with me, and then but more were coming, and so then as it got to like 4 or 5 people, 4 of them rented another house like 4 doors down on the same street. So that at least got them not living in my house and like out of there. And then, but then they were still working on my house, so that got kind of old. So then I bought another house on the same street, and that became the office. And so we moved all the servers down there, and we had a little like point-to-point wireless network, like antennas on the roofs connecting all of them, so they were all on a LAN together. This was also like a big deal then, and now it's like super easy with like 3 Apple, little wireless routers. But we had it all kind of connected off the T1, and they all lived in one house. I lived in another house, and then we all would skateboard up and down the street to work. We all brought our dogs to work, and we all worked out of this house. And we eventually got up to like 25 people working out of the house. So like during the day, there was like this huge line of cars out front.
This is one where the neighbors start calling the police and say, "There's something really weird."
No, at first they thought we were all drug dealers, I think. But then after a while, we started hiring all the kids on the street, like as like interns, and then they all really liked us because we were employing all of them. And they soon realized we were like the neighborhood guardians. Like if somebody's dog got loose, we'd grab the dog, throw it in our backyard. If there's any, like we were there all the time. If anything was going on, we were actually like the neighborhood watch. So they liked us by the end. But anyway, so this was all kind of Trilogy, and so during the day I would do Trilogy, and then I had to come back and do that. And I did that for a year. And at Trilogy, I went through the boot camp, and we started a startup there. And the one that I was working on ended up getting funded, and ran it for about a year. And we closed 1 or 2 big deals that were like multi-million-dollar deals. So that was really interesting for me. We deployed a bunch of technology, and we sold it almost exactly a year later for about $20 million in stock in this other company. And Trilogy owned the whole company, so all that money went to Trilogy. And at that point, everyone in the team was going to work for this company that bought us, which was based in Seattle. And this was the summer of 2000 now. And so if you're, depending on how much history you know of the boom and the bust, this was like summer of 2000 was like the bust was happening, but everybody didn't quite know it yet. It was like they were like asking, like, is this the bubble bursting? And it was the bubble bursting. And so, fortunately, I was the only person on the team that did not go with the company. I was like, I don't think I want to do that. And Trilogy was no longer putting $100 million into the incubator because things were kind of changing. And so I didn't want to go sell enterprise software and do that. And so, but my company was still doing fine and growing. And so at that point, I then went back to focusing on my company. And that was really now, it's kind of like a year out of school. It's the summer 2000. And it's for the first time ever, I'm actually focused on the company full time. I don't have school. I don't have another job. I don't have something else. Not surprisingly, it started to grow a lot faster after that.
So you moved out of the house eventually?
Not for a while. We stayed in the house that was 2000. We stayed in the house till 2003, 2004 probably. Then we bought a little building up north on Pond Springs Road, right across where I met Jason Cohen from WP Engine. His Smart Baer was like right across the street from us. And we had this great little building, and we put up a fence in the backyard, or in the yard around it, so we could still bring our dogs. And so it was like it was still very much like the house. And then eventually we moved downtown, and we moved into the 8th floor of this building in 2005, I think. And that was awesome. Moving downtown is great. Like it was, downtown. If you're in Austin, you want to be downtown. We have such a great downtown. It's, compared to other cities, it's actually super easy to get to and super easy to deal with. And you can do so much down here. So it's almost like it was almost like I moved to a new city because it was like, what? We have this downtown? There's all this stuff down here? Like now I'm here all the time.
I had the opposite. I didn't know about that part till I went to work out there. So I'm getting a sense of this now. I had a question. Skylist in 2006 was listed one of the best places to work. One of the things that's always hard when you run a company is creating a culture that people are willing to work really long hours for possibly not a lot of pay. Sounds like some of that was just you made it fun. You know, casual, people could bring their dogs. Did you do other things? Was that a conscious thing, or did it just sort of happen? Yeah,
no, it was really conscious. And winning that award was I often refer to as one of the things I'm most proud of for Skylist and for the company. That was really important to me, and kind of that was the kind of award we wanted to get. Most awards are bullshit. Pretty much all of them. That one is not totally bullshit, but it's also, I mean, it's the people in your company that vote for it, and it's put on by a newspaper or somebody else like that. That's in the end, everyone has their own goals. But of all the possible bullshit awards, that was the one that was the most interesting. That to me, that was what meant the most. And really, it was I just always took the attitude of I just wanted to build the kind of place where I wanted to work, and I believe, and I think this is still true, that most people will actually choose lower compensation for a better place to work. Not everybody, but most people don't. It's not just how keep things as Spartan as possible, pay me as much as you can. People want to, I think, feel like they have security and they're part of something, and they want to, you spend a lot of time at work. So you want it to be somewhere that is comfortable and that also is, and who you're around is really important. You want to work with really great people. And so, yeah, I think we made a lot of different trade-offs there. And I think, even in the space we're in now, some of that still shows through that, people that work up here, this isn't the cheapest place to work.
It's super cool.
That's not why you come up here. But if you want to attract the very best people to work for you, you want to be up here. And if you're going to work 16-hour days, you want to do it up here. If you're going to have a hackathon and stay up all night, you want to do it up here. And if you're going to work all day and then have to, you want to be able to walk out to a bar or walk out somewhere else around here, or go to see a show or do something else.
Did you have situations there where you brought people on and it wasn't the right fit for them?
Sure. I probably had 1,000 people work for me.
And
not every one of them worked out. Yeah, and that's certainly something that I think changed a lot between my first company and there's a lot of things I look back. I was a 19-year-old CEO. I did lots of dumb things, said lots of dumb things, hurt lots of people's feelings, and I'm not proud of that. I recognize it, and now I know all these things I do differently because of that. And so the biggest lesson I feel I got out of that is I try to, just like in the mantra and everything else with lean startup and things like that, is fail quickly. And so it's like, now I know to trust my gut.
Prolong the pain.
Oh yeah, like when it feels like it's not working out, it's not working out. Don't take another month to figure out that your gut's right. Now I know that feeling. And just stop. It's better for them, it's better for you, it's better for everybody. And I've got more of a rhythm to it where I know to check in and okay, it's 2 weeks. I know there's something I should know by 2 weeks if this is working or not. When you bring on people, having really clear goals for and ways to evaluate them, and then as much as you can, get some of that before they come on. So yeah, definitely certain kind of people it worked for and certain kind of people it didn't. I also hired a lot of my best friends to start, and that was a really challenging situation. And some of them aren't my best friends anymore. And that was, it was like one of the guy that I sat next to on the wall with when told that I wanted to be an entrepreneur that first week of school ended up being my big, basically my big brother at the fraternity, and then ended up working for me. And that's just like a strange situation. It's some people deal with that fine and other people don't. And I certainly learned better ways to deal with that. I think it's a lot easier to come work with somebody and then become friends with them than to be friends with somebody and then work with them. and I was young and did lots of dumb things. So like you combine all that together and like it didn't all work. Now I feel like I'm in a much better spot. Like I know what kind of people I want to work with and what's going to work well, and how to figure that out ahead of time, and how to evaluate things and make sure that if it's not working, that it changes quickly, and setting expectations a lot better. I think another good sign of like a first-time manager or CEO versus someone more experienced is I have a rule that if I ever need to let somebody go and they are surprised, I totally failed. Like totally failed. And early on, like they'd always be surprised. They'd be like, "What? It's not working?"
Everything was fine.
Yeah, like, I thought it was great. You just told me it was working great. You're smiling at me yesterday. Like, and it's like, no. Like now, like if things aren't working. Like and that's really important. Like it's just like, nobody should be surprised, right? Like you should be giving them feedback and you should be talking about things and people, and so that was that's certainly something I've learned through that.
So switching to something more positive, you sold Skyless. What was that experience like? It wasn't your first sale then, judging from what you said a minute ago.
It was my first sale. So Trilogy sold the other company, and I had some visibility into it, but it wasn't like my deal.
Right. So talk a little bit about that. What did you learn from that experience? And you've obviously had the opportunity to do it as well. So.
Yeah. So that was certainly a huge learning experience. I use a racetrack analogy a lot around this. That not that I've raced that many cars or anything, but with any kind of thing, the first time you do something, it's a lot harder than the second time. In anything, right? First time you walk somewhere and you walk back, you're like, man, I went way faster walking back than walking here. Was that shorter? I don't get that. We walk the same way. It's the same kind of thing. When you've seen something before, it's much easier. It's much more comfortable. And so part of it for me, when at the time that I sold it, I'd bootstrapped the business up till then. I owned the whole thing, and we weren't a huge company. We were doing a couple $1 million in revenue. Like we could have at that point taken venture capital and tried to grow it and tried to become the exact target or responses or Constant Contact that just went public.
So how did you know that line of like?
And so that was the first part of the big debate, and it was a lot of soul searching, right? And it was this thing I'd spent like at the time like 8 or 9 years building it. I mean, it felt like my whole, that was my whole life's work, right? And like, and I had kind of sunk all your eggs in one basket, right? It was like that was the thing. You don't want to screw it up. Like, oh crap, should I sell it now because I have the opportunity? Should I go? Am I being stupid? Should I go raise money and try to play it big and do something bigger? Am I risking everything that I have? What do I want out of life anyway? Do I want to be part of that thing that's bigger, or do I want to have an exit? And that's where the racetrack thing came in for me. I think I realized, first of all, that I knew I wanted to do more than one company, that this wasn't my whole life's work on this one company, and that the sooner, and then even when we were considering selling it, and I'd worked on it for 9 or 10 years, and I was like, okay, well, if I sell it now, if I even agree to start selling it now, to start having this conversation, well, this conversation takes 6 to 9 months. And then I'm going to have some kind of a obligation to work with the company for a period of years. Yeah. So like whatever I do now, on a good case scenario, I'm done 3 years from now. So, and I've been working on this for like 10 years already. So, crap, if I don't sell it now, that means I go work on it for another couple of years, and then I'm in this position later. I'm talking 6, 8 years from now, before I'm going to be done with this. And I was like, no, I want to finish this, not because I have something wrong with this, but because I want to make it all the way around the track. And I want to have seen what all that was, so that now I'm in a better position to kind of go do that again. So that was a really big driver for me. I also realized I was 30, and I realized that, and this was very true, that it was going to really change my life considerably to go through that experience. Both, financial security obviously is one of those, and like money and everything, that's for sure. But like having financial security changes the way you live your life, for sure. And so that was really big. I didn't date a lot before then. I certainly dated, but like I was mostly working, and I wasn't really serious about a family or other things then. And for me, having that financial security actually completely changed my attitude toward, I realized, I didn't understand it before then, but I realized I wasn't ready to have a family until, and this is just different for everybody, but for me, until I had financial security and I felt like I could like take care of it and deal with it and things like that. So that really made that a lot easier for me. And so at the time, I just was like, wow, this is the time to do it. I have to do it now, because if I don't do it now, it's going to take even longer, and I know I want to go do it again, and I don't want to do these other things. And so it was a tough decision, but and it was really, I mean, it was like figuring that out was like a month or a month and a half of basically depression. I mean, I think that's probably what it is, but it's like, I mean, that's what it's not fun, that part of it. Like, that part of it's like, over and over and over again for days, and like talking to people, and nobody has any answers for you. There's no right answer. Nobody can tell you what to do. It's soul searching. Like, you got to figure out what you want, and that was a long, hard process that was really depressing. At the end of it, then you sell your company, and then you have another year or two, not always, but often depressing, after you sold your company, and then maybe you come out of it.
I hope to someday
experience that depression.
So then, starting Other Inbox, which you did after Skylist, was that a different experience than starting Skylist?
Yeah, completely. Because Skylist was just an accident, right? Skylist was just somebody offered to pay me to do something. That was the right way to start a business, in general. It was like true customer development and lean startup, even though they didn't know it then. With Other Inbox, now I actually, for a little bit, like, deluded myself into thinking that I had a crystal ball and I could predict the future, and which lots of people go through, and that suddenly now now I can, this is what it's going to be. And it did start with my own personal problem. I mean, I was solving my own problem, and I was taking something that I was doing and trying to bring it to more people. But really, the initial idea that I thought was like the idea and the thing we were in stealth for like 9 months working on, and I couldn't tell anybody, and we were going to get a patent, and we were going to do all this other stuff, and we don't do that anymore. That thing didn't really work. And through that, fortunately, we discovered other things that did. But yeah, it was very different, because it started out like there was a big idea, like, oh, there was this big idea, and it was going to change everything. And I'm not saying that never works, but that didn't work for me. That was not actually, the big idea was wrong.
I think many people can relate to that.
Yeah. And then with that business, I raised money, because hey, I was a successful entrepreneur. I had built another business. I had sold these others. I knew all these people. People would invest in me, right? And I invest in other companies. I don't think inherently raising money is a bad thing, but as through that process, I now have a strong preference to raise as little as possible and to bootstrap as much as possible. And I bootstrapped the first business. I like how that feels a lot better.
So it's different than when you're thinking about an exit, when it's not just you having that decision with yourself of is this the time or not, but now you have to consider too that you've got other people who have skin in the game, and they may have an opinion. Yeah,
that's part of it. I mean, fortunately, I was very much in control of the company, so it wasn't that it was a personal feeling of wanting to recognize that, as opposed to, like, I still had the decision-making ability to do what I wanted to do. But yeah, you have obligations, obviously, to people that are giving you money, that you're trying to take care of, and that you usually you probably have a lot of respect for and don't want to let down.
Right.
And there's just a whole set of different pressures that come with that. Like, inherently, when you're raising money, you're getting out ahead of your skis. Like that's like by definition, you're betting on what's going to happen, right? And there are times when that makes a lot of sense, but I think people are often too quick to do it, and too quick to think that, and too many people think raising money is some sign of success. Like, that is not success. Raising money, you didn't accomplish anything yet, and most companies that raise money don't accomplish anything. It doesn't mean that you won't. Like, there's some that do, and those are the ones that make a lot of money. But most of them don't work, so that doesn't really mean anything yet. And I think that was, that was certainly a different path about it.
So let's talk a bit about Capital Factory. So this is definitely a creation. What was your inspiration here? Why did you reach out to the people that you reached out to start it?
Sure. So, but as I mentioned before, really the core, if anything, was the true inspiration for Capital Factory. It was actually Trilogy University. It was TU, because that was just something I had gone through and I had seen and had a great experience with. So just the core of like the real core of the mentoring and the kind of the process and putting through that time period and other things. A lot of it came from there. But that was earlier. That was 1999. In 2008, first of all, Y Combinator had been out for maybe a year or two, and I certainly had been following that space. And when I first heard about it, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. That sounds great. And it reminded me of TU, And I was like, oh wow, that's like TU, but now done on this whole other scale. And wow, isn't that great? And so I just certainly looked up to it, and I'm a big fan of all Paul Graham's writings and his Hackers and Painters books, one of my favorite books ever. And so certainly I was already a fan. And then in 2008, and then separate from that, I was already doing angel investing, and generally in my friends and people I knew from CMU and people I met through Trilogy. And people that just where I thought somehow I had access to this pool of really smart people, and I was like, oh, look at all these, I have this unique access to these really smart people. They're going to often do great things. I should invest in them, and that's going to be that'll be a good opportunity. And I knew I liked doing that. I liked thinking about other businesses and talking about other businesses. And what I found really quickly was that the way I invested was that there were basically two kinds of early stage investors, and there were entrepreneurs who were founders who were then reinvesting in other entrepreneurs, and then there were what I would call a financial investor, which means they looked at this as an asset class and a calculation about returns. And quite frankly, my opinion is most founders don't, when they make a startup investment, they are not calculating returns. And it's just like a totally different type of investment. Usually the first thing I do when I meet an entrepreneur and I'm like talking to them about an investment is convince them to make the terms better for them, which is kind of the opposite of what you would think would happen. But usually that's like the first piece of advice I'm giving them. It's like, no, this isn't set up right. Like you're not going to own enough of the company to make this work, or or like these terms aren't right for what you're trying to do, and if you sign this now, you're going to be in a bad position later, kind of thing. And so what I found was, and then also like I didn't want to write a check and then like get a bunch of like spreadsheet reports. Like I wanted to be involved. I wanted and I wanted to invest in things I thought I could help with in some way, where I could make connections to maybe the customers I'd had before, or it had something to do with email or something I knew about. And that was there was just a really different feel between that and some of these other investors. And so what I started doing was finding the other people like me, where I would invest with them and I would go, oh, they get it. They're like me. I want to be in more deals with them because they're trying to do the same thing I am. They're trying to lift this person up and kind of optimizing on success, looking for the for the big wins, not optimizing for the downside of what happens when this doesn't work. And so that informally was happening, and so the second thing with Capital Factory was kind of formalizing that, like basically gathering up all those other people that were kind of like me or like thought about it like I did, and creating a way for us to invest together, because I already knew I wanted them in my deals, and so this was a way to kind of make that work better. And then specifically the thing that made it happen right when it happened was that at the end of 2008 was the 2 crashes ago?
Yeah,
Last crash?
exactly.
I don't know what crash was.
Another crash.
Yeah, was a crash, and that was like that was the crash after the 1999 crash, and that was the real estate market crashing, and as that happened, the 1999 crash was a U.S. focused crash, at least from my perspective at the time. It was really mostly it was here in the U.S., and the 2008 crash was a global issue. And I just had this feeling at the time of, wow, is this different than the other thing? Like the 1999 thing kind of went over pretty quickly, but the 2008 thing, I was really intimidated by. I was like, wow. In fact, as an entrepreneur, I love that. The attitude is like, whatever problem there is, I can fix it myself. Like I can go do something about it. And that was the other thing that sucked about the the global crisis was just this feeling of like, it's out of my control. Like, I can't do anything about it. These things are happening at a global level that are going to affect me, but how do I do anything about it? How do I impact it? And so that was a feeling of like, I need to do something. Like, I want to, whether it's for me or for everybody or whatever, I just like, I'm not, like, I didn't like sitting there. And then also this feeling of like, hey, well, this feels like a local minimum. Like, this is like, we're at a valley, like,
Right.
which means
There's
things should only be getting better from here. And that's actually a really great time to start companies, because you have a rising tide effect, that as the economy gets better, there's actually less competition at that time. That's a good time to invest. And you expect that as things get better, your companies will go with it. The average life cycle of a funded company is about 7 years. Throw that at the beginning of a down cycle, that's a good thing to ride through.
Right.
And so I was like, wow, on the one hand, I have this feeling of the need to do something. On the other hand, this seems like the best time to do something. And that's really why we started it when we did. And so we started Capital Factory at the first class was in 2009. We started working on it in 2008. And that was really, very loosely modeled after Y Combinator. I'd never been to Y Combinator, but I read the website.
Right.
And then I was at TU, right? And I knew what Trilogy was like. I was really fortunate to meet with Brad Feld from Techstars early on. He was super helpful and kind of giving me some advice about what they had done there. And so then we kicked off Capital Factory and just started. And it started as what then was kind of like innovative, and there were like only a handful of these things, and now is somewhat almost kind of commonplace, which is an accelerator program where it was a summer program. It was 10 weeks long. You got $20,000 in cash. There were mentors to help kind of dig in with you and really meet with you every week and help you with your startup. And at the end of it, we'd have a demo day where companies could pitch and basically present to investors and try to raise funding and get to that next step. And we did that for 3 years. We did 3 classes. And while, at some level, that description of $20,000 in cash, 3 months of mentoring and demo day is pretty common across all these. The things that I think set us apart, what made us different than other ones, is one, obviously location. We're here in Austin. We're the only one in Austin. 2, the funding for ours comes from the mentors. In almost all the other groups, it comes from like a VC firm or somebody else, and the mentors are all volunteers. Whereas our mentors were actually all shareholders and engaged, and I think that makes for a different relationship. And then really, in the end, it's just like every program is about the people that are in it, and like who do you want to meet with, and who do you think can help you, and who has a good fit for kind of your background and expertise and things like that. And for me, that's what I like best about Capital Factory is the mentors and the other people that are in it. Is I really think we've assembled just many of the very best entrepreneurs in Austin, and so the bar is really high to be a Capital Factory mentor. You basically have to be my mentor. So I'm the worst mentor at Capital Factory. That's the rule. So every other mentor is somebody that I want to be my mentor. That is, that I would want teaching me, and that's who we bring in. And it's just an incredible group of people. So that was the program we did for 3. Oh, and the last thing is we had 20 mentors, and we did 5 companies this summer, which we thought was really good because we thought we were giving a lot more attention to each of the startups, and that would make them more successful. It turns out that actually I now think was poor choice. That was a bad decision because this is still a numbers game, and there's something called the law of small numbers, which basically says that if chances are really low and you only take a few swings, you're probably just going to whiff out on all of them. We by no means have whiffed out. We've got some great companies that have gone through our program, but we did it for 3 years and we have a total of 15.
Right.
And Y Combinator does like 60 per class, right? And you don't hear about the 55 that didn't work. You just hear about the Dropbox, right? And so all that matters at some level is that you have one winner, or a small number of winners. And to do that, you need to have a big class. And there's things that come out of that. So we were fortunate that we still had winners in there. And our best company is called sparefoot.com. They're right across the street, and they're across the street that way. And they're doing great. It's going to be a very big exit for Austin and a great deal for us. But we have 15 companies, and we've got one rock star company and a bunch of others that are still doing well. And in the time that we've been doing it,
That's pretty good.
It's pretty good, but it's not where we need to be, right? And so one of the things that's so exciting now is since this summer we opened up this new space. This is 22,000 square feet. We're right in the middle of downtown. We've got 175 entrepreneurs working up here, representing about 80 companies right now, and we're only halfway there. like we're going to get up to like probably 250 people and hundreds of people and more than 100 companies. And we're now through this able to do a lot more. We're able to operate year round. We're going to be able to incorporate a lot more mentors to be involved in helping and work with a lot more companies. And I think that will work better for the accelerator program, but it also is now just something bigger than it was. Now we're able to just work with a lot of companies that maybe don't even go through the accelerator program. We have this great event space, and every night there are meetups and events like this going on, whether it's a technical meetup or an inspiring meetup or SEO or something else. While we were doing this here, there was another meetup going on over there in the conference room back there, and that's pretty common here that there'll be 2 or 3 things going on at once on any given night. I think in October we had about 3,000 people come through here, and that creates a whole other thing that wasn't there before, and something new, and is great. It's the community that's developed around it.
Definitely think so. So at this point, I'm going to kick off the Q&A with a question and then open it up to y'all, which is, so if a company wants to apply to be part of Capital Factory, how do they do that?
Sure. So we are still a little bit reworking the process now that we're trying to make it work for a lot more companies and in this space. But so we are a startup. Like Capital Factory is a startup, a bootstrap startup actually. So we're still learning and growing and changing. So whatever I'm going to say now will probably be different in like 6 months. But basically, the way you apply is through AngelList. That part probably won't change. And so you go to angel.co. You need to make an AngelList profile, which is basically like a LinkedIn profile for your startup. And that's a good thing to do anyway. So hopefully, even if whether you get into Capital Factory or not, that would help you by making you go do that. And basically through that, you can submit that and tell us about your company. And what's really great about that for us is that they all come in kind of the same format, right? And rather than everybody explaining it a different way, we can kind of compare them in a pretty simple way, and they ask the right kind of questions for what we're most interested in. For you, it's really good too, because for your startup, that's a great way to meet other people, to meet investors, and to build up a profile. And as you talk to different investors, your profile actually gets better and better. And even people that don't invest in your company still end up making your profile look better. So it's a tool that you can use over time to build up momentum. And so you apply for that, and then we review those monthly. And we have a small review committee, and that'll pass you. Once you pass that, you're now passed to be able to be in the space. It means you can get on there's a waiting list for desks and for co-working, but that's how you get on there. And then once you're in there, you can also come to what we call office hours. We have office hours here every week. We're working on getting to every day, where there are different mentors that are in here meeting with startups, and you sign up for 20-minute spots to go meet with different mentors. And so the way you get into the accelerator program now is you have to, again, how we're trying to distribute this and make it more scalable. So once you pass the AngelList application, you have to come meet with mentors, and you have to convince 2 mentors to be your lead mentor. And being your lead mentor means that they're committing to both time and money. Which are their two most. Their time is probably more valuable than their money. But the mentors are all CEOs, CTOs, founders of some other company that's already been successful and is out there, and they're agreeing to meet with you once a week for 3 months. So that's a pretty significant time commitment where they're going to be working with you to try to help really get things moving forward. Obviously, that comes with a whole bunch of other things. They're going to open up their Rolodex. They're going to try to work with you on their particular expertise. They're going to help with hiring. They're going to help with introducing you to customers. They'll help with a lot of different things. And then they also have to make a small investment. And if 2 of them do that, then this is the new way. This is not the way it used to work now. Then you're in. And then also we have a small sidecar fund we're putting together where we'll then match whatever they invest. And so that way, that allows for companies to work different ways and to raise different amounts of money. They'll typically get anywhere between $20,000 and $150,000 as part of that. Although the money is not required. Actually, we also tried to make sure this was accessible to bootstrap companies that aren't raising money, or to crowdfunded companies that are raising other ways. So the money is one component of it, but it's not a required component. And then as part of that also, we've actually dropped our equity requirement. So I'd say the common average in this space is for accelerators to take 6 to 7% of the company for the types of services that we do. Some take 10%. Our target right now is to take 3%. that's also, we're basically trying to drive those things down and allow us to scale more and also the problem with actually the more equity you take is there's a selection bias problem where the very best companies won't do that. Right, and we're trying to optimize for the very best companies. We want the very best ones to apply, and also one of my favorite companies is Amazon. And one of the things I love about them is how they keep completely disrupting the server market, and they don't do it by charging more; they do it by charging less, and it completely screws with everything. They just keep dropping their prices and finding ways to deliver more value for less. And so that's what we're trying to do here, and even more so than that of that 2 to 3%. A half point of that goes directly to the lead mentors, which means those mentors that agreed to spend time with you and are putting money in also are getting a half point directly in the company, like a founder. So they're really incentivized to work with you and to spend time with you, and even after the 3 months to continue helping. And really, actually, Capital Factory is really getting about 1%, and that's really just meant to try over time. It doesn't do it in the short term, but over time to actually just provide more funding for the things we do here in the operations and things like that.
Excellent. All right, it's your turn. Go ahead.
I had a history question.
Okay.
What percentage of Austin's entrepreneurship and IT market that we have here, the culture that we're talking about today, how much of that do you trace back to Trilogy being here and bringing all of these folks here, such as yourself, who for all intents and purposes, you could be in Pittsburgh now or wherever.
Yeah. So the question was, how big of an impact was Trilogy on the current kind of tech startup scene? So interestingly enough, last Friday I was giving a different talk here, and it was specifically an intro to the Austin startup scene. And so I'd encourage you to check that out because I went into a little bit more detail there about the history of the startup scene and what I thought there. And there's a video of that on YouTube at youtube.com/Joshua Baer, and there's some slides on SlideShare. But the short answer is that I think it had a huge impact. Before that, there was Dell, which didn't directly, I think, drive a lot of the startup and software scene that we see here, but it did create a lot of Dellionaires who made a lot of money at Dell and did go and invest in startups, and that helped, but it wasn't like, most of the people you meet in the startup scene here, they're not coming from Dell. Right? It's like, it's a bunch of Dell people going and starting this next company.
I met a lot of people from Trilogy, though.
But there are
a lot of former Trilogy people.
Yeah. And if you look at every really successful tech company in town, almost every single one, the upper ranks, both the management and the most senior individual contributors, they're mostly Trilogy people. There's a lot of Trilogy people. And you can see the hot company, in its own way, like Silicon Valley, sucks. There's a herd of Trilogy people that move to whatever the hot company is at the time. So I do think that had a really big impact. Trilogy was recruiting at peak, on the order of 1,000 people a year or something like that they're bringing in, and these were all from some of the best schools in the world. They were very entrepreneurial people, and a lot of those people stayed. A lot of those people came to Austin for Trilogy, but they stayed because they fell in love with it here, and then they went on to start many other companies. And it's just, if you look at Bazaar Voice, at HomeAway, at Indeed, 3 of the biggest recent exits, all multi-billion-dollar companies, all Trilogy people. It's obviously not all Trilogy people, but you go look, there's a crap load of Trilogy people in the senior ranks there. And so I do think if there was any one biggest impact, to me, I think that's probably it in the past 20 years.
Okay, you first, and white shirt, then blue shirt.
So it sounds like
Can you introduce yourself when you ask a question too?
Okay, I'm Matthew with Space Enterprises. It sounds like as an entrepreneur, you're kind of opposed or more opposed personally to capital, and now you kind of find yourself on the other side of the equation. And I'm wondering, in terms of addressing those concerns that you have from the entrepreneur side, what you're doing based on your own personal feelings about capital in general.
Sure. So the question was, that I said, I bootstrapped my first company and I've raised money, and yet I seem to be kind of bashing raising money or a little down on it. And so then he's like, but you invest in companies. So that I guess he's calling me a hypocrite maybe in a nice way.
Nicely.
And so so there's lots of different businesses, and there's lots of different opportunities, and for For some businesses, the only way to do it is to go raise a lot of money. And that doesn't make it a bad business, but it might make it a business that I'm not that interested in. And as an investor, I'm much more interested in actually being a co-founder than being an investor. And often investing is like the door opener. It's like the table stakes. Like to get involved, the easiest way to get involved with a company I think is interesting is to invest some money. Now usually one of the first things I do is when I meet a startup that's raising money is try to convince them not to raise money. I talk to them about every other way they could do this without raising money. And in those cases, a lot of times I might, even if I were successful in that, I might still be an advisor to that company. I might still get equity in that company, and might be a co-founder with them, because I can talk them out of necessarily going and raising money. Now that said, I mean, it's necessary for a lot of things. And there's lots of different levels of it, and then some of it's just like, when do you raise money? Like, raising money when you've kind of proven out your business and it's working, and you're like, man, I'm just missing out on these opportunities. If I just could go hire 3 salespeople, they would immediately go make a ton more money. I know exactly what they're going to do. Or, man, like I could be spending twice as much on SEO. It's totally working for me. It's like every dollar I put in, $5 spits out. I just need to go spend twice as much money really fast to make this business grow faster. Those are all really good reasons to make money. That makes a lot of sense. And you're not going to give up much of your company in doing that in those situations. But these days, you shouldn't need to raise money to like prove an idea. Like, you probably should be able to like get the thing proved and get something going on your own without that. And so I think there's just a balance there. Like, I don't think most of the time true complete bootstrapping is too slow, and then most of the time the amount of money people think they need to raise is probably more than they really need to raise. And I think there's somewhere in the middle. At Capital Factory, our focus right now is on startups that we think can get profitable on less than $1 million in funding. It doesn't mean that they won't raise more than $1 million in funding. It means they don't have to. And that's $1 million in a world of startups is still relatively not a ton of money to raise. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's like, for a startup, that's not that much money. That's a seed round or an angel round. And with these days, there are a lot of startups that can do that, and they don't ever have to raise more money. They can get profitable on that. They can grow, become a big business. GitHub, like bootstrapped. They didn't raise any money, and then they got huge, and then raised a bunch of money at a really big valuation. Like, go do that all day long. That's great. So I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's good. I think it's different for each thing. The way I'm investing is much more on the bootstrap side of it.
So my question is somewhat related. I think you're also describing a paradigm shift in the cap structure of a startup today versus maybe what you saw in the 90s. And there are also certain types of enterprises that fit your view of that. So could you kind of delve into that a little bit better? Because that also, I think, explains what is a fit for Capital Factory.
Sure. So the question said that these types of companies that maybe can get profitable quickly or raise less money tend to fit a certain type of profile. The structure of the company ends up looking a certain way because of the types of investors they take, and then you often end up having more control over the company too, which are some other benefits. I think the trends are, so over particularly the past like 15, 20 years, there's a number of trends that have just dramatically driven down the cost of doing a technology startup. And most of what I'm talking about are tech startups. There's all kinds of startups, there's all kinds of businesses. I'm focused on software companies. And what I'm going to say applies mostly to software companies. And this is why I'm focused on software companies. To start off with, you can create something out of nothing, like we said to begin with. The cost of doing that has dropped dramatically. When I was in college, it was probably about the average Series A to start a company was about $5 million. And you spent $1 million on software, you spent $1 million on hardware, or you spent $1 million like on Oracle on a database, $1 million on like Sun on hardware, $1 million on like some other kind of custom software, $1 million on salaries, and $1 million on marketing. And it was like boom, 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 boom. You spent $5 million. These days, almost all those costs have dropped close to zero. So you can, with open source software, you don't buy any more software. The open source software is actually better than most of the commercial software that you can buy. With cloud computing, you don't buy any hardware. so you don't have to have any upfront expenses for that. So you can start and pay a fractional amount of money until the business starts to scale. There are new distribution channels so that people don't really spend money on marketing that doesn't directly produce a return. So because of search engine marketing, because of Facebook, because of app stores like the Apple App Store and others, it's so much easier to get your product out there and get distributed. All these other things have driven costs down so much that that for certain types of startups that fit that, you can start them on $50,000 instead of $5 million, which is enough that usually somebody can scrape that together. And that's really, really changed things. And it puts the entrepreneur much more in control. It gives, if you do those ways. If you go do the traditional way, you're at the mercy of the VCs and whoever's the money. And the terms are going to be that way, and they're going to be telling you what to do. If you go and you do it the other way, you're going to be in control of the company the whole time. And you're going to be in a much better spot.
In the back.
Ryan Rumsey. We've seen recently a movement towards strong design in San Francisco and New York, startups in those areas. Do you foresee Austin continuing that? Is there a gap there? What impact has design had?
Sure, so the question was, you said in Silicon Valley it seems there's a trend towards strong design. I haven't heard that term before, but I think I know what you mean. But certainly putting an emphasis on design and designers. Do we think that's going to continue here in Austin? So yeah, I think there is a big shift on designers, and I think that's going to continue to happen. I think it's happening here in Austin. I think it'll happen across the board. I think one really big impact has been the iPhone and mobile. People's expectations of a mobile solution, for some reason, are much, much higher than in other places and on the web. And so if you're on the web, you can have a crappy web. Like there's always a joke often that like crappy websites that look crappy so often outperform ones that look really nice. And like for some reason, like it's like you think like this looks way better than the other one, but people just like this other one better, and they end up using it more. Like, look at Craigslist, right? Like somehow Craigslist is still the big winner in the space, and it still looks like it was written in 1998. And I think they just got images, right? It's like so somehow though the mobile's different. And it's very, very hard to have a successful mobile application that does not have a really beautiful user experience, and just the expectation is much, much higher. And consumers are getting more savvy. There's a trend called the consumerization of IT, which is focused primarily on actually how you buy things. That a lot of IT solutions that used to be enterprise software are now being sold the way you buy consumer stuff, where somebody, even though it's for a business, somebody goes to a website and buys something with they don't swipe things on websites, but they buy something with a credit card, and it's self-service, and they just go do it themselves. So that's part of consumerization of IT, but I think another part of it is also expectations around design and what people are expecting out of the application. So I think it's a really strong trend. It's certainly something that a lot of other investors have latched onto as well. We do a lot of co-investing with 500 startups. In Mountain View, that's a huge part of their focus. And the other thing is when you look at like the commoditization of programming and implementation and technical work, where now you can outsource things overseas, and there's so many different options for how to get things built inexpensively. So there's different ways to do that. One way is if you have really, really good designers and you can spec things really, really well, then you can effectively get anyone to build it. That does not work for everybody, and it doesn't work for every kind of situation, but in certain situations that works really well, and that's an example of that, where if you have everything right, that's really all you need. Now, that spectrum can swing way the other way. I generally use what I think are really high quality onshore resources for different trade-offs, and so that we don't necessarily have to try to know what to build before we build it, which is really hard. But I think, yeah, that's a super strong trend. It's going to continue. We definitely see it here in Austin. I think it's only going to continue to grow. And I see a lot of investors that they never used 3 years ago they didn't ask what your design talent was like, and now they do. Like they want to know who the designer is or how it's going to happen.
You and then you.
So I've got kind of kind of an advice-oriented question, but I'm going to keep it as general as possible. I'm a recent graduate and went to go work at Whole Foods, which is a great corporate job. But I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I'm starting to think working for a startup is going to give me a much better experience. The issue I have is I don't have any technical background in IT, and I was wondering what do people who sort of fit my profile, what can they offer to startups, and then how can they get involved in startups in the area? How can they meet these people and network?
Well, it's hard to answer that question generically. Like, if you're a programmer, it's like, what can I offer to startups? It's like, well, we know what you can offer to startups. And if you're the inverse of that question is hard because it's like, I don't know. There's a million things they need, and I don't know, what your background is or what your skill sets are, or things like that. So the first thing would be finding a startup that somehow fit with things that you were passionate about or you had some experience with. So you had some maybe domain expertise or something that maybe the programmer wouldn't, that was going to help you to do that. One thing that's really a strong trend as well that I certainly believe in is the lean startup philosophy and methodology around customer development. And so learning to be an expert at customer development and how to evaluate ideas and opportunities and test them is not something that's technical or coding, but it's really, really valuable and is very hard to do. And that's something that you can be an expert at and could really bring to the table. But specifically as far as how does somebody get plugged into startups or maybe get more experience around them, one of the things that I'm the biggest, my biggest, I'm a fan of for that type of thing, just this past weekend, there was an event called 3-Day Startup at ATI. There are other events during the year. They do one 2 or 3 times a year. There's another event called Startup Weekend. There's one called Lean Startup Machine. There are hackathons. And all these types of things, they're basically like lock-ins where they put a whole bunch of people in a room together and basically expect startups to come out the other end, 2 days later. And that's always a mix of different people. There's obviously a lot of technical people there. There's a lot of people that aren't technical. And there are a lot of things to do that aren't technical. And getting into those environments is a really great place because you will meet all kinds of other people that are working on startups. You're going to get exposed to the whole startup life cycle and how to think about it and what happens there. And you'll see the opportunities. Like, you'll see maybe 5 or 6 different things being worked on and be like, okay, I can add value to that one. I can jump in there. And I started off, I think early on, saying something about, opportunity through activity. So just going there and being around startups and, finding ways to try to do something to be helpful, you will find other things to be helpful. And so I think they're a really great opportunity for that.
Yeah, Jia Jiang, and I own a company here, and I operate here in Capital Factory. It's a really fun place to be. So, 2 questions. One is, Silicon Valley is still seen as the place to be for startups, and I think Austin is probably maybe top 5. So I want
maybe.
I don't know. So what's your opinion of where Austin is in the pecking order, and can you ever challenge Silicon Valley as the place to be? My second question is, since you're very familiar with the startup scene here, who do you think is the next hot startup from here?
Sure. So the question was, how does Austin compare to Silicon Valley and other places like that, and what's the next kind of breakout startup here in Austin? So, I think Austin's, kind of a number 3. I hear that from a lot of people. There's no right answer, right? So whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, Silicon Valley and New York are the top 2. I think everybody understands that. Next it would be Austin, Boston, Seattle, kind of, that's probably the mix somewhere in there. I think this quote originally came from Richard Florida in the creative class, and then Paul Graham paraphrased it, but Paul Graham has a saying about how cities have different aspirational cultures, and Boston, with all the universities, is be smart. New York is be rich. DC is be an insider. LA is be famous. And Austin is be yourself. And that's what this place is, and that fits really well with entrepreneurs. And so, because being an entrepreneur is kind of about being yourself and doing things your own way and changing things. And so one, I think that's just part of how we fit in. Silicon Valley is just like, you know, New York is Broadway, and LA is the movies, and you know, and DC is politics. Silicon Valley is startups, and that isn't going to change. We're never going to be better than Silicon Valley at that game, at their game. So that's not what I'm trying to do. And if I wanted to be Silicon Valley, I'd go move to Silicon Valley. I think Austin's a great place for startups, and I think there are trade-offs. You know, like I'd never say to somebody like, "Oh no, don't go to Silicon Valley to start your startup. That'd be stupid." Like, no, of course not. That's a great idea. There's lots of people that do that, and you know, like, and there's lots of reasons why people do that, and that's where a lot of the most successful startups go. But there are lots of successful startups from other places, and Austin, I think, you know, is a great place to do that. It has a great, some great trade-offs. In particular, I think Silicon Valley is at a peak. So Silicon Valley, you know, they're at the top of their game, and you know, maybe each year it gets a little better, maybe each year it gets a little worse. But like, there's a pretty well established hierarchy there. And so if you know people and you can go get a bunch of meetings on Sand Hill Road, then it's great. And if you don't, it can be really hard. And doing a startup often involves being poor for some period of time. And San Francisco is not a fun place to be poor. Austin is a great place to be poor. There's a ton of stuff to do here that doesn't cost any money, that's fun, there's you know, to plug into, and so I think, you know, quality of life is a huge thing. And in Silicon Valley, people think about startups all day long. It's all they think about. And on one hand, that's a good thing, if you're doing a startup. But I do think, you know, there's more to life. And most people that come to Austin come here for quality of life. It's that they want to be able to do a good startup and have a great opportunity to do that, and have an environment that's very supportive for that, that's got a, you know, that's cost effective, that has a great community, that has people to hire, that has you know, ways to grow the company, that has funding. And I think we have all those things. But most people that come to Austin also are making a trade-off and saying, "How? I want to own a home someday, and I want to, you know, go. I'd like to do things outdoors. I like to go outside and do stuff, and inexpensively. And I'm into the music scene, and I'm into, you know, after work, I want to go do something else." And I think that's why a lot of people, you know, choose to be here, and certainly a big reason why I do.
I saw a question over here. So, yeah.
Chris Mathias, Rebel Fire Consulting, and hopeful co-technological founder in something one of these days coming up soon. My question for Capital Factory is along the lines of, within the context of the program, what are the KPIs that you use to measure the progress of your pigeons while they're here? And once they, I don't know what you call it, exit, graduate, leave, what sort of maintenance of the relationship goes on, if any?
Sure. So the question was, how do we measure the companies in the program and what happens after they get out? Most programs, similar to us, measure by how much money the companies have raised. And that's because the time cycle to evaluate the actual end result is 7 to 10 years. So you find out the failures faster than you find about the successes, right? Like the good companies take longer to work. The ones that fail usually fail faster. So it takes a long time to find out if they worked or not. And so even Y Combinator, which has been around the longest, hasn't really had any exits yet. Right? You know, the big ones, they've had a bunch of little ones, but even now it's like Dropbox, Airbnb, they just have really big valuations. And I think they're very valuable companies and they'll be very valuable, but it's just, even that, they don't have an exit yet. So they're still measuring it by how much money have they raised. With Capital Factory, especially with our new focus, we've really made an intentional effort to not focus on how much money companies raise, because we're trying to target companies that don't need to raise a lot of money. So that doesn't really make sense for us. And so we focus on revenue. Do the companies make money? And how much money do they make? And are they profitable, and are they growing?
School.
And that's what we get impressed by, and that's what we measure. And there really is no end to the program. There's different types of programming we do, and there are, there's some periods of intense focus, but the relationships that you make, all 20 of the mentors are still investors when it ends. Like, we still talk to them. They still get invited. They still come to events. We still meet with them. Many times the mentor ends up then joining the board or like something like that, and being involved in another way. So I think there's no end. It's not like there's a sharp break. It's very much a continuous process.
So my name is Luca. I just arrived to Austin yesterday. So I'm from Europe, from a country called Slovenia.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. So we've been working on an application for a year and a half in cooperation with some company from Austin. And so the question is whether you will have time after the talk or something to look at it.
Great. Yes, not tonight, but I do look at, I spend a lot of time doing this stuff.
Well, I think you'll be talking to Michael as well about.
Cool.
I saw a hand over here. Yes.
I'm curious about your personal investing philosophy. Is it team? Is it market opportunity? Is it a little bit of both? What's most important?
It's both of those things. I'm generally a really early stage investor. I'm usually kind of the first money in, and so it's I don't do a bunch of like research on the market or like things like that, it's really I have to. For me, I don't invest unless I'm going to work with the people, and so if I don't like them and think I'd want to spend a lot of time with them, then it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, I would never do it unless I feel like I really connect with the people involved and want to work with them. And then, then it's, I would say for me, it's the next thing is really, how do I help? Like, why is this a good investment for me? And I don't know if I don't mean that in a selfish way, but like I'm only interested in ones where I want to put money in and then immediately make it more valuable because I'm involved. So an easy example of that is an email startup. If you're an email startup, I can help a lot. And so I invest in email startups. These days, if you're an Austin company and you're a tech startup, almost no matter what you're doing, I can help a lot because I can help with recruiting and with press and with space and with vendors and a whole bunch of different things for Austin companies. So the next thing I'm really looking for is I want to feel like, wow, I'm gonna make a difference. I'm gonna be able to help this company and work with them. And then in the end, yeah, I have to believe that it's when you say market, it's like, are they solving a real problem? Is what they're doing valuable? And is there some some reasonable amount of people that would pay for that? I don't get super hung up on like, oh, this market's too small. I find that if you solve a real problem that's valuable and you have smart people, they will find more opportunity within it. A lot of times things look small and they change and become bigger.
So Josh, your investing strategy, the way you talk about it is that poster there, right? But your KPI for the companies is, are they making revenue? There's somewhat of a disconnection between those 2 points of view, right? The KPI is purely financial, but the investing strategy is not really about money at all. Can you talk to that observation?
Well, at the time that I'm investing, they usually are so early, they just don't have any money. They don't have revenue. Although not always. I'm actually more and more these days they do have some amount of small revenue or something like that. But yeah, it's just that it's so early that I know many things are going to change as they go through their path, and so I don't pretend to think that the thing that they're pitching me is actually the thing they're going to go do, because it's going to change because that's just the nature of it. Now, in the end, if it's working or not, like things are only sustainable if they make money. So like, it's not like the making money is like from an investment perspective. Like it's more like, is this thing going to work? Like the only way to tell is if it's making money, and like that's the measure of if it works or not for a business.
Is it the only way to tell?
Yeah, it's like, that's it. Like, I mean, there's nothing else. I mean, it depends what kind of business you're building. There's some businesses that are not based, that are all about getting eyeballs or, like we're not going to make any money. Foursquare doesn't really make any money. Some people still think it's never going to. Instagram didn't make any money and created a great amount of value, right? So if that's what you're doing, that's great. I can't help you with Instagram. That's not my game. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Just I It's not for me.
No, go ahead.
If the model is for, and maybe this is, my question is maybe, what's the right fit for an accelerator, I guess, if the model is the kind of company that doesn't require a lot of capital to get going and needs to get to a certain scale of revenue and, sort of be profitable, at some modicum level or whatever, does that by definition mean that maybe like companies that are trying to solve some really big problems that perhaps need a lot more capital and a lot more runway to do that may not be a good fit for accelerators? How do you kind of do that?
Probably. I mean, and accelerators are often for first-time entrepreneurs. Not only at all, but in fact, I would generally choose to do one because right now, even because I think there are a lot of benefits to being part of that group. But if you look at the the stereotype, it's more first-time entrepreneurs who also probably shouldn't be doing something like that. So, yeah. Accelerators are not for capital-intensive businesses unless it's an accelerator specifically designed for that type of thing. Like the whole accelerator model is a really good fit for companies that do not require a lot of capital. That's why they get like $20,000, which is not a lot of money for a lot of in these cases. They are really a good fit for software businesses that can make considerable progress in a very short amount of time. These programs run over the summer for 3 months, and you're expected to do something during that time to show how much you got done. Those aren't hardware companies, right? So yeah. Unfortunately, I think that's true. It doesn't mean that those companies can't get funded or can't get seed funding or can't do other things. It just means they might not be a good fit for an accelerator program.
I'm going to take a couple more questions. You had one?
My question was actually pretty similar to on the same lines as that one, but it was just mine was that for a lot of software companies, you don't want to raise money first, and it's more about investment. My question to you is what would you recommend someone in order to go with a brick and mortar type of company? And I guess that was kind of the answer in that one.
Yeah, I mean, I've very little experience there. So I'm an investor in one restaurant, like a couple different, a couple things in particular. But yeah, inherently anything that's not software is going to require more capital. And unless you get really resourceful, maybe you have a really clever way to do it so that it doesn't require a lot of capital. But more commonly, it's going to. And so now it's even more important that now you need to understand more how you're going to, how it's really all going to work. You need to have a little better crystal ball, because now you're going to go spend a bunch of money and order a bunch of stuff or buy things. You got to make sure that all lines up and it works and people are really going to pay for it, and the rest is going to happen. But yeah, unfortunately, that's not where I have as much experience.
So for that type of company, would you shy away from the investment kind of strategy, for them to follow the same kind of structure as a software company would?
It probably wouldn't be the same as a software company. Often those companies will need to raise more money. Often a brick and mortar business is not, I hate to say it this way, but not as innovative. It's but more well understood, and you can look at other examples and know what it's, you can say okay, if I can look at these examples and I understand what my margin are, and I know what I'm going to sell and why people are going to buy it, how I'm going to market it. And a lot of the businesses that we're working with, no one's ever done this before. This thing doesn't exist in any shape or form like what it is. And so it's a lot riskier, but the trade-off is you're not putting out all that money up front because someone can just spend their time to go build something or to do something like that.
Okay, one more question.
Hi, Brandon from TapSavvy. You touched briefly on move to mobile and consumerization of IT. What other trends on your radar are kind of most interesting to you, or do you think represent the biggest opportunities?
I mean, I don't think anything's gonna be really shocking here, but mobile. Mobile is everything. Everything is mobile. Anything you're building, you should be building the iPhone version of it first. Not because people use everything's. We've already tipped. The people are already using their phone more than their computer for more things, and so I think mobile is a huge trend. Yeah, I mean, there's other than that, I don't have anything really specific. I think consumerization of IT is it's not something new, but it's been a couple of years. But that's something that Austin's strong at. I think Austin's also really strong at mobile. Yeah, I wish I
Maybe not opportunity, but like interesting, like wearable technology or something to that effect. Like what other?
I really like how what we're seeing now is kind of big data mashups where things can tie together, like my calendar and my email and my contacts in a way that it can make much better decisions for me. So an example is a startup that a friend of mine has called a Wayfind, and their goal is to send you a text message, or to keep you from having to check your email, and let you know, send you a text message if there's a really important email that you need to check. And so they tie into your calendar, and if you have a meeting with someone today, and you get an email from that person, it sends you a text message that says, hey, you just got an email from this person that you have a meeting with in 2 hours. And chances are that's an important email if it's someone that you're about to have a meeting with in 2 hours. And it's not super complicated what they're doing, but it's like this idea that like this data is all linked together and can work together to do things that I didn't have to think about or configure. It just figured that out, that was important.
All right. Thank you very much. Been fantastic.